The wolves saved her life, but they couldn't protect her from the men who hunted her through the frozen wilderness. January 1873 carved its brutal signature across Wyoming Territory, where the line between survival and death measured itself in heartbeats and frozen breaths. In that merciless white expanse, one young woman's fate would intertwine with the ancient wisdom of wolves and the unexpected mercy of a Comanche warrior who walked between two worlds. Eleanor Hartwell never imagined that her father's medical journals, filled with frontier remedies and healing secrets, would mark her for death. Nor could she have foreseen that the pack of wolves stalking the wagon train would become her unlikely guardians when human family proved more savage than any wilderness predator. This is the remarkable account of how a doctor's daughter, abandoned to die in nature's fury, discovered that sometimes salvation comes with fangs and feathers rather than familiar faces. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The Medicine Bow Mountains wore January like a shroud, their peaks disappearing into storm clouds that promised neither mercy nor reprieve. The Prescott wagon train had been fighting through deepening snow for 3 days, each mile harder won than the last. Eleanor Hartwell gripped the wooden bench of her uncle's wagon, feeling the wheels catch and slip on the treacherous ground beneath them. The canvas cover snapped like gunfire in the rising wind, each gust carrying the promise of the blizzard everyone knew was coming. At 23, Eleanor possessed her late father's keen intellect and steady hands, though fate had denied her the chance to follow his path as a frontier physician. Dr. Thomas Hartwell had been beloved throughout the territory, riding countless miles to deliver babies, set bones, and fight the endless battle against disease and injury that claimed so many frontier lives. His death 6 months ago from pneumonia had left Eleanor not just orphaned, but vulnerable in ways she was only beginning to understand. "Eleanor, move those medicine crates further back." Margaret Prescott's sharp voice cut through the wind. "They're making the wagon list to one side." Eleanor carefully made her way to the crates that held her father's legacy, his instruments, medicine vials, and most importantly, his journals. 12 leather-bound volumes containing 20 years of frontier medical experience, remedies learned from indigenous peoples, and observations about the healing properties of native plants. In the territorial settlements, where doctors were scarce and death common, such knowledge was more valuable than gold. "I still don't see why we had to bring all this medical nonsense," William Prescott grumbled from the driver's seat, his thick beard crusted with ice. "Taking up space we could use for proper supplies." Eleanor bit back her response, having learned over the past months that defending her father's work only invited more criticism. The Prescotts had taken her in after her father's death, but their charity came wrapped in constant reminders of her dependent status. They had already sold her father's house in Cheyenne, claiming the proceeds were needed for this journey to Oregon Territory, where William had been promised a position in a logging operation. "Father's journals contain invaluable medical knowledge," Eleanor said quietly, unable to completely hold her tongue. "Treatments that could save lives on this journey." "Unless those books can stop a blizzard or feed us when supplies run low, they're just dead weight," William replied, "like other things we're hauling." The implication hung in the frigid air, as sharp as the ice crystals that stung exposed skin. Eleanor pulled her wool cloak tighter, her fingers finding the small leather pouch she wore beneath her dress. Inside were her father's compass, his pocket surgical kit, and the letter that had arrived 2 weeks before they left Cheyenne, a letter she hadn't shared with anyone. The wagon train consisted of 12 families, all driven by various promises of better lives in Oregon. Leading them was Marcus Webb, a former cavalry officer who claimed to know these mountains like his own parlor. But Eleanor had noticed the worry lines deepening around his eyes as they climbed higher into the passes, and the way he constantly checked the darkening sky. "Riders coming in!" The shout from the front of the line sent a ripple of tension through the travelers. Two scouts emerged from the swirling snow, their horses laboring through drifts that reached their bellies. Eleanor recognized Ben Turner and his son Jake, hired to range ahead and find the safest routes. Their faces, when they pulled close enough to see, told a story no one wanted to hear. "Trail's gone," Ben reported to Webb, his voice carrying the flat tone of bad news delivered. "Avalanche took out the main pass. Snow's piling up fast in Broken Ridge Canyon. If we don't find shelter soon—" He didn't need to finish. Everyone understood what happened to wagon trains caught in the open during a Wyoming blizzard. The winds alone could reach speeds that tore canvas covers apart and scattered supplies across miles of wilderness. Combined with temperatures that plummeted far below zero and snow that could bury a wagon overnight, the mountains became a white tomb for the unprepared. "There's an old mining camp," Jake Turner added, ice forming on his sparse beard as he spoke. "About 2 miles east. Some buildings still standing, might hold us until the storm passes." Webb frowned, consulting his worn map. "That's off our route. Adds days to the journey if we survive the storm." "Better than freezing in the open," Ben countered. "This isn't just another snowfall, Marcus. This is a killer storm building. I can feel it in my bones." Eleanor watched her uncle's face during this exchange, seeing calculation replace concern. William Prescott was a man who measured everything in profit and loss, and she could almost see him weighing the cost of delay against the risk of pushing forward. "We should take shelter," Eleanor ventured, drawing irritated looks from both Prescotts. "Father always said the mountains don't forgive pride or poor planning." "Your father's dead," Margaret snapped, then caught herself. "God rest his soul. But we need to think of the living. William, what about the Pattersons' offer? We need to reach Portland before spring if you're to secure that position." Eleanor watched this exchange with growing unease. The Pattersons were lumber barons in Oregon, and William's opportunity depended on arriving before the spring logging season began. Every day of delay ate into potential profits, and profit was the language the Prescotts spoke most fluently. Clara Prescott, Eleanor's cousin, huddled in the corner of the wagon, her normally rosy complexion pale with cold and fear. At 17, she was pretty in a delicate way that frontier life would soon erode if she survived it. She caught Eleanor's eye and attempted a weak smile. "I'm frightened, Ellie," she whispered, using the childhood nickname that seemed increasingly out of place. "The wind sounds like wolves howling." Eleanor moved to comfort her cousin, but froze as she heard something beneath the wind scream. Not wolves, not yet, but something else. A low rumble that seemed to come from the earth itself. "Everyone move!" Ben Turner's shout cracked like a whip. "Avalanche! Get to high ground!" Chaos erupted as drivers whipped their teams into motion, wagons lurching forward through the deepening snow. Eleanor gripped Clara as their wagon jerked violently, William cursing as he fought to control the panicked oxen. Behind them, a wall of white death cascaded down the mountainside, swallowing everything in its path. The thunder of falling snow mixed with human screams and the terrified cries of animals. Eleanor watched in horror as the Hendersons' wagon, just 2 places behind them in line, disappeared beneath the churning white mass. Martha Henderson's scream cut off abruptly, leaving only the roar of the avalanche and the wind's demonic howling. "Keep moving!" Webb's voice carried over the chaos. "Don't stop! Make for that ridgeline!" Eleanor held Clara as their wagon bounced and slewed through the snow, William driving the oxen with desperate determination. The avalanche spent its fury just yards behind them, leaving half the wagon train buried beneath tons of snow and rock. In minutes, 6 families had been erased from existence, their hopes and dreams entombed in white silence. The survivors huddled on a narrow shelf of rock, wagons crowded together as the storm closed in with renewed fury. Eleanor did what she could for the injured, using her father's supplies to treat cuts, breaks, and the creeping danger of frostbite. But medical skill meant little against the greater threat of the storm itself. "We can't stay here," Webb announced after a hurried conference with the remaining men. "Wind's picking up, and this ledge offers no real shelter. We push for that mining camp or we die here." "Some of the wagons won't make it," William observed, his pragmatic tone chilling in its detachment. "Too heavy for the animals in this snow." Eleanor understood the implication immediately. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Decisions about what and who was essential would need to be made. She saw her uncle's calculating gaze fall on her father's medicine crates, then on her. "We should redistribute the weight," Margaret suggested, her voice carrying false concern. "Pool our resources, travel lighter." What followed was a grim triage of possessions and people. Families were consolidated into fewer wagons. Non-essential items were abandoned in the snow. Eleanor watched as her father's precious medicine crates were eyed with increasing hostility. "Those crates take up the space of 2 people," William finally stated. "In these conditions, we need to make hard choices." "These medicines could save lives," Eleanor protested. "Just this morning, I treated Jimmy Turner's fever with father's willow bark preparation. Without it, he could have," William cut her off. "We're dealing with certainties now. The weight of those crates could be the difference between this wagon making it through or getting stuck." Eleanor felt the circle of faces turned toward her, saw the calculation in their eyes. She was a young woman with no family of her own, no husband, no children. In the brutal mathematics of survival, her value was being weighed against more practical considerations. "There's another option," Margaret said, her voice taking on a reasonable tone that Eleanor had learned to distrust. "That old trapper's shack Jake Turner mentioned, the one near Broken Ridge. It's only a mile back, sheltered from the worst of the storm. Someone could wait there with the medical supplies until the weather clears." The suggestion hung in the air like ice crystals, beautiful and deadly. Eleanor saw the logic of it reflected in the faces around her. A neat solution that removed both burden and moral complication. "I'll go," Eleanor said quietly, the words surprising even her. "If someone must stay behind, it should be me. I know these medicines, know how to use them. When you send help back, I'll be ready." She saw relief flicker across several faces, followed quickly by shame. But shame was a luxury survival didn't allow, and everyone knew it. "It's settled then," William declared, moving with sudden efficiency. "We'll leave you with supplies, food, blankets, matches. The storm can't last more than a day or 2. As soon as it breaks, we'll send riders back." Eleanor knew better. She'd lived in the territory long enough to know that blizzards could rage for a week or more, and that promises made in desperation were as fragile as spring ice. But she also knew that her uncle had already made up his mind, had probably been looking for just such an excuse since they'd left Cheyenne. Within an hour, she found herself standing in the snow beside a small pile of supplies, watching the wagon train disappear into the white fury of the storm. Clara had wept, genuine tears that provided some small comfort. Margaret had avoided her eyes entirely. William had pressed a small bag of food into her hands with gruff instructions about rationing, as if a few days' supplies could sustain her through what might be weeks of isolation. Jake Turner, at least, had shown genuine concern. He'd tied a rope between trees, creating a guideline to the trapper's shack, and given her detailed directions. "Follow the rope," he'd said, guilt heavy in his young voice. "Shack's sturdy, built into the hillside, has a fireplace. You'll be safe there until we come back." Now, alone in the gathering darkness with the storm screaming around her, Eleanor gripped the rope, and began to walk. Each step took her deeper into the white void, away from whatever safety numbers provided and toward an uncertain shelter. The rope was already accumulating ice, becoming harder to grip with each passing moment. Behind her, the wind erased the wagon tracks within minutes, as if the train had never existed. Ahead lay only the storm and whatever fate waited in the mountain's merciless embrace. Eleanor Hartwell, daughter of a beloved frontier doctor, found herself reduced to the most basic human struggle, the fight to survive another hour, another minute, another breath. As she struggled through the deepening snow, following a rope that might lead to shelter, or might simply end in white nothingness, Eleanor couldn't know that eyes were watching her progress. Not human eyes, but the golden gaze of predators who ruled these mountains long before wagon trains carved their desperate paths through ancient hunting grounds. The wolves had been shadowing the wagon train for days, drawn by the scent of weakness and death that followed it like a shroud. Now they watched the lone humans struggling through their domain, and in their wild hearts, calculations as cold as any humans were being made. But nature's mathematics followed different rules, and sometimes, in the harsh algebra of survival, the most unlikely alliances were formed. Eleanor pressed on, the rope her only lifeline in a world gone white and mad with winter's fury. Behind her, the past dissolved into storm. Ahead, an uncertain future waited in the gathering darkness. And all around, ancient eyes watched and waited as the mountains prepared to test another human soul in their timeless crucible of ice and stone. The rope ended at a wall of rough-hewn logs, and Eleanor's frozen fingers fumbled along its surface until they found the door. The cabin materialized from the storm like something from a fairy tale, small, squat, but blessedly solid against the wind's assault. The door, swollen with moisture and age, required all her remaining strength to force open. Inside, darkness greeted her, along with the musty scent of long abandonment. Eleanor stumbled through the doorway and fought to close the door against the wind, finally managing to drop the wooden bar into place. The sudden cessation of the storm's direct assault was so profound that for a moment she simply stood there, gasping as her ears adjusted to the relative quiet. Her father had taught her that survival began with assessment, so despite her exhaustion, Eleanor forced herself to explore her shelter. The cabin was perhaps 12 feet by 15, with a stone fireplace against one wall and what remained of crude furniture scattered about. A wooden platform in one corner suggested a bed, though any mattress had long since succumbed to time and wildlife. Gaps between the logs let in whistles of wind and fingers of snow, but the roof seemed intact. Most critically, a small stack of firewood remained beside the hearth, covered in dust and cobwebs, but dry enough to burn. Eleanor's hands shook as she arranged kindling and struck her flint, knowing that fire meant the difference between survival and a slow death from hypothermia. When the flames finally caught, casting dancing shadows on the rough walls, she allowed herself a moment of pure relief. As warmth began to seep into the cabin, Eleanor took inventory of her supplies. The Prescotts had left her with enough food for perhaps 4 days if she was careful. Dried meat, hardtack, a small bag of cornmeal, and tea. Her personal possessions included her father's medical bag, 2 blankets, a knife, the compass, and, most importantly, one of his journals she'd managed to secrete in her pack. The storm raged throughout the night, and Eleanor maintained her fire while trying not to think about how quickly the wood supply would dwindle. She dozed fitfully, starting awake at every change in the wind's pitch, every creak of the cabin's logs. Sometime near dawn, she heard something that made her blood freeze, a long, mournful howl that seemed to come from just outside the door. Wolves. Clara had been more right than she knew when she said the wind sounded like wolves howling. Now the real thing was here, drawn perhaps by the smoke from her chimney or the human scent that marked this place as different from the empty wilderness around it. Eleanor gripped her knife, though she knew how useless the small blade would be against a pack of wolves. Her father had treated numerous wolf attacks during his years on the frontier. He'd told her that wolves rarely attacked humans unless starving or rabid, but a harsh winter like this could drive them to desperation. The howling came again, closer now, and was answered by another voice, then another. A pack, and from the sound of it, they were circling the cabin. Eleanor added more wood to the fire, hoping the smoke and light might deter them. She could hear scratching at the walls now, the sound of large bodies moving around the perimeter of her shelter. As grey dawn light filtered through the gaps in the logs, Eleanor peered through a crack near the door. What she saw made her gasp. Wolves, at least 6 of them, moved through the snow like grey ghosts. But these weren't the starving, desperate creatures she'd expected. These wolves were massive, their thick winter coats making them appear even larger. The pack leader, identifiable by his size and bearing, was almost pure white except for grey markings around his muzzle. To her amazement, the wolves weren't trying to get into the cabin. Instead, they seemed to be waiting, watching. The alpha sat directly in front of the door, his yellow eyes fixed on the cabin with an intelligence that made Eleanor shiver. The other wolves had spread out in a rough circle, all facing outward, as if standing guard. The day passed in a surreal standoff. Eleanor maintained her fire and rationed her meager supplies, while the wolves remained outside, neither threatening nor departing. When she needed water, she melted snow in her single pot. When nature called, she used a bucket in the corner, too afraid to venture outside even for basic needs. By the second day, Eleanor noticed something odd. The wolves had killed a deer. She could hear them feeding during the night, but they'd dragged the carcass close to the cabin. When she peered out at first light, she saw they'd left portions of meat in the snow near her door, almost like an offering. Her father's journal contained several accounts of wolf behavior he'd gathered from Native American patients and frontier trappers. One Cheyenne elder had told him that wolves sometimes showed unusual behavior during harsh winters, particularly around what they called spirit times, moments when the boundary between the human and animal worlds grew thin. By the third day, Eleanor's firewood was running dangerously low. She'd have to venture outside soon or freeze when the fuel ran out. The storm had lessened but not stopped, and snow continued to fall steadily. The wolves remained, their presence now strangely comforting rather than threatening. They'd established a routine, hunting at night, guarding during the day, always maintaining their circle around the cabin. On the morning of the 4th day, Eleanor made a decision that went against every instinct of frontier survival. She opened the door. The alpha wolf rose immediately, but made no aggressive move. Eleanor stepped into the snow, her knife clutched uselessly in one hand, her heart pounding so hard she thought it might burst from her chest. The wolf watched her with those penetrating yellow eyes, then did something that made her question her sanity. He turned his back to her and walked a few steps away, looking back over his shoulder as if to say, "Follow me." Against all reason, Eleanor followed. The wolf led her to a windfall tree not 30 yards from the cabin, its trunk buried in snow, but branches protruding, dry wood protected from the worst of the weather. The pack watched as she gathered an armload, then escorted her back to the cabin, maintaining their protective circle. This pattern continued for days. The wolves would lead her to resources: wood, the cleanest snow for melting, even the frozen carcass of an elk they'd killed. They never threatened, never came too close, but their protection was absolute. When a mountain lion's scream echoed through the forest one night, the pack's answering chorus made it clear that this territory was defended. Eleanor began to document the experience in the margins of her father's journal, her trained observers. Mind recording every detail of behavior, every interaction. She sketched the individual wolves, noting their markings and personalities. The alpha she called Ghost for his white coat. A female with a scarred muzzle became Survivor. A younger male with unusual grey markings around his eyes was Watcher. As days blended into what might have been weeks, time lost meaning in the white sameness of the storm. Eleanor found herself talking to the wolves, particularly Ghost. She'd sit by the window, watching him through the gaps in the logs, and tell him about her father, about medicine, about the betrayal that had left her here. The wolf would tilt his head, appearing to listen, his eyes holding an ancient wisdom that transcended species. Her food supplies dwindled despite careful rationing. The wolves seemed to understand, leaving larger portions of their kills near the cabin. Eleanor knew that eating raw meat carried risks, but starvation was a certainty. She used her father's knife to cut what she needed, always aware of the pack watching her with what seemed like approval. One morning, she'd lost count of how many days had passed. Eleanor woke to silence. The constant howl of the wind had stopped. She peered outside to see clear skies and sunshine so bright off the snow it hurt her eyes. The storm had finally broken. Ghost stood in his usual position by the door, but something in his posture was different. Alert, watchful. The other wolves had spread out more than usual, all facing the same direction, north, toward the trail. The wagon train had taken. Then Eleanor heard it. The jingle of horse tack, the crunch of hooves breaking through crusted snow. Someone was coming. She should have felt relief, but instead, a strange dread filled her. The wolves' agitation increased, low growls rumbling from several throats. Ghost moved closer to the cabin, positioning himself directly between Eleanor and the approaching sound. Through the trees, a figure emerged, a lone rider on a paint horse, moving with careful precision through the deep snow. As he drew closer, Eleanor could see he wasn't dressed like the typical frontier traveler. His clothing was a mix of Native American and white man's garments, practical rather than aligned with either culture. Long black hair hung loose beneath a battered cavalry hat, and his face showed the weathered complexion of someone who lived more outdoors than in. The wolves' growling intensified as the rider approached, but they held their positions. The man reined in his horse well beyond the pack's circle, his dark eyes taking in the scene with obvious surprise. When he spoke, his voice carried the musical cadence of someone for whom English was a second language. "This is strange medicine," he said, addressing Eleanor, though his eyes remained on the wolves. "I have tracked many things through many storms, but never have I seen wolves guard a white woman's shelter." Eleanor stepped into the doorway, acutely aware of how she must look after weeks of survival, hair matted, clothes torn and dirty, face gaunt from rationing. "They've been protecting me," she said, her voice hoarse from disuse, "since the storm began. Who are you?" The man dismounted slowly, his movements deliberate and non-threatening. The wolves watched, but didn't advance. "I am called Samuel in the white man's world. My people, the Comanche, know me as Hawkeye. I track for Fort Laramie sometimes. Other times, I follow my own path." "Were you looking for me?" Eleanor asked, hope and suspicion warring in her chest. "Looking for the wagon train that passed." "Through these mountains before the great storm," Samuel replied. "Found what was left of it 5 miles north. Avalanche took many. The rest." He shrugged. "Gone to Oregon Territory," the survivors said at the fort, "all accounted for." The words hit Eleanor like a physical blow. All accounted for. The Prescotts had simply erased her from their story, told the authorities that everyone had been found. No rescue party had been sent because officially she didn't exist. "They left me. she said unnecessarily. Said they'd come back after the storm. Samuel's expression didn't change, but something in his eyes softened slightly. White people's promises are written in snow. They melt with the first warm day. He gestured toward the wolves. These ones tell a different story. In all my years, I have never seen such a thing. The spirits move strangely in these mountains. Ghost chose that moment to stand and walk towards Samuel, stopping just out of reach. Man and wolf regarded each other for a long moment, some wordless communication passing between them. Then, to Eleanor's amazement, Ghost turned and padded away into the forest. One by one, the other wolves followed, melting into the trees like morning mist until only their tracks remained in the snow. They know their work is done, Samuel observed. You are found. Their protection passes to me if you will accept it. Eleanor felt tears freezing on her cheeks. Whether from gratitude, loss, or simple exhaustion, she couldn't say. I don't understand any of this, she admitted. Why did they help me? Why did you come looking when no one else did? Samuel was quiet for a moment, studying her with those dark, penetrating eyes. My grandmother would say the spirits choose their own paths. The wolves saw something in you, perhaps the healer's heart, perhaps something else. As for me, he paused, seeming to choose his words carefully. I dreamed of wolves guarding a golden-haired woman. Among my people, such dreams demand action. Eleanor touched her tangled hair self-consciously. Golden was a generous description after weeks of survival. I'm Eleanor Hartwell, she said. My father was Dr. Thomas Hartwell. The healing doctor, Samuel interrupted, his expression shifting to surprise. I knew of him. He treated many of my people without regard for payment or politics. A good man. The fort commander said his daughter traveled with the Prescott wagon train. His dead daughter, apparently, Eleanor replied bitterly. Since I've been accounted for. Samuel's gaze sharpened. You have his medical supplies? His knowledge? Eleanor nodded. Some supplies, though not much left. And I know what he knew. He taught me, though I could never officially practice. Buddy, official is another white man's word that melts like snow, Samuel said with a slight smile, the first she'd seen from him. Come, we will gather what you need. The journey to Fort Laramie takes 3 days in good weather. Storm clouds gather again to the west. As Eleanor collected her few possessions, including her father's precious medical bag and journal, she found herself glancing repeatedly at the forest where the wolves had vanished. She'd survived because of them, these wild creatures who had chosen, for reasons she might never understand, to protect rather than prey upon her. Samuel helped her onto his horse, then swung up behind her with practiced ease. As they began to move away from the cabin that had been her sanctuary and prison for so many weeks, Eleanor heard it, a long, mournful howl rising from the forest depths. Ghost's voice, she recognized, joined moments later by the rest of the pack. They sing farewell, Samuel translated, though Eleanor had already understood, and blessing for the journey ahead. As they rode through the snow-laden forest, Eleanor found herself telling Samuel about her weeks with the wolves, about Ghost and his pack, about the strange protection they'd offered. He listened without interruption, occasionally nodding as if her words confirmed something he already knew. My people have stories, he said when she finished, times when the animal spirits intervene in human affairs, usually at moments when the great balance has been disturbed. Your abandonment, the cruelty of your own kind, perhaps the wolves sought to restore what was broken. Eleanor considered this as they traveled, the steady rhythm of the horse's movement strangely soothing after weeks of stillness. She thought about her father's work, his dedication to healing without regard for race or status. Perhaps something of his spirit had lingered, had called to the wild hearts of the wolf pack. There's something else, she said suddenly, remembering, the letter hidden in her clothing. Before we left Cheyenne, I received a message from a lawyer in Denver. My father had filed a mining claim years ago, not for himself, but to protect Native American sacred sites from exploitation. The claim is valuable now. The Prescotts. I think they knew. I think that's why they were so eager to see me gone. Samuel's arms tightened slightly around her as he processed this information. And you have proof of this claim? The letter and my father's journal contains the original survey notes. Eleanor patted the bag tied to the saddle. He wrote everything down, always said proper documentation could save lives as surely as medicine. Then we have more to do than simply reach Fort Laramie, Samuel said thoughtfully. If your words are true, there are legal battles ahead. The territorial authorities must be informed. Justice must be pursued. Eleanor turned slightly to look at him, this man who had appeared from the storm, like something out of legend. Why does this matter to you? You don't know me. You owe me nothing. Samuel was quiet for long moments, guiding the horse around a fallen tree. I told you of my dream, he said finally. But there is more. Your father. He saved my sister's life many years ago. Rode through a blizzard worse than this one to reach our camp. She had the fever that was killing so many. He stayed 3 days, nursing her and others back to health. Asked nothing in return. He paused, his voice dropping lower. I was young, angry at all white men for what they had done to our lands, our people. Your father changed something in me. Showed me that good and evil live in all men regardless of skin color. When I learned his daughter was among the missing, the dream only confirmed what my heart already knew. I had a debt to repay. As they rode on through the white silence of the winter forest, Eleanor felt something shift inside her. The bitter cold that had nothing to do with temperature began to thaw. She had been abandoned by blood family, left to die for the sake of greed and convenience. But she had been saved by the wild hearts of wolves and the honor of a man who understood that some debts transcended death itself. The sun was setting, painting the snow-covered mountains in shades of rose and gold, when Samuel pointed to a sheltered grove ahead. We camp here tonight. Tomorrow, we reach the main trail to Fort Laramie. As they settled in for the night, building a fire and sharing what provisions Samuel had brought, Eleanor found herself watching the forest shadows. Somewhere out there, Ghost and his pack hunted beneath the rising moon. She wondered if she would ever see them again, these unlikely guardians who had kept her alive when her own kind had condemned her to death. They're still out there, Samuel said, following her gaze. Watching, protecting still in their way. He handed her a cup of hot tea, brewed from pine needles and herbs. You have been marked by their favor. Among my people, this would make you special, different. Eleanor sipped the tea, feeling its warmth spread through her chest. I already was different, a woman who knew medicine but couldn't practice it, a burden to those who should have loved me, an inconvenience to be discarded when survival got difficult. No, Samuel said firmly, you were a healer's daughter who survived what would have killed most. You were chosen by the wolf spirits for protection. You carry knowledge that can save lives and legal claims that can protect sacred lands. You are not what others named you. You are what you choose to become. That night, Eleanor slept better than she had in weeks, wrapped in warm blankets beside a properly banked fire. She dreamed of wolves running free beneath the moon, of her father's gentle hands teaching her to suture wounds, of a future that suddenly seemed full of possibility rather than limitation. When she woke, the first thing she saw was Samuel tending the fire, his profile strong against the morning light. The second thing she noticed made her sit up with a gasp. There, in the snow at the edge of their camp, were fresh wolf tracks. A single set, larger than the others, Ghost's distinctive print. Samuel followed her gaze and nodded. He came in the night, circled the camp once, then returned to the forest. Checking, I think, that his charge was well protected, Eleanor dressed quickly and walked to where the tracks led back into the trees. There, placed carefully on a flat rock, was a small bundle of fur. She approached slowly, recognizing it as she drew near. A wolf's shed winter coat, twisted and tied with sinew into a small pouch. "A gift," Samuel said, appearing beside her, "and a promise. The wolves do not forget those they have chosen to protect." Eleanor picked up the fur bundle, feeling something hard inside. Opening it carefully, she found a small stone, smooth and white as Ghost's coat, with what looked like natural markings that resembled a running wolf. Her eyes filled with tears as she clutched the token. "We should go," Samuel said gently. "The trail to Fort Laramie is clear, but weather moves quickly in these mountains." As they packed up camp and continued their journey, Eleanor kept the wolfstone close to her heart. Behind them, the mountains stood silent and white, holding their secrets close. But she carried with her the knowledge that in the hardest winter of her life, when human hearts had proven cold, the wild had opened its arms and given her sanctuary. The trail to Fort Laramie stretched before them, and beyond that, a future Eleanor could barely imagine. There would be legal battles over her, father's claims. There would be confrontations with the Prescotts and their allies. There would be those who questioned her story, who doubted that wolves had guarded a doctor's daughter through the worst blizzard in memory. But there would also be opportunities. Her father's medical knowledge, preserved in his journals and in her memory, could still save lives. The mining claim could protect native sacred sites from exploitation. And perhaps in this vast territory where the old ways and new world collided, there might be room for a woman who had been claimed by wolves and saved by honor to forge her own path. As they rode through the morning light, Eleanor thought she heard it one more time, a wolf's howl, distant now but clear. A farewell, a blessing, a reminder that some bonds transcend the boundaries between worlds. Samuel heard it too, and his quiet smile told her he understood its meaning as well as she did. The future waited, uncertain but no longer hopeless. Eleanor Hartwell, daughter of a beloved frontier doctor, had died in that blizzard-besieged cabin. What emerged was someone new, a woman who had looked into the yellow eyes of wild wolves and found not death, but deliverance, who had learned that family could be chosen by the heart rather than determined by blood, and who carried within her the strength of all who had saved her. Her father's healing wisdom, the wolves' fierce protection, and the honor of a Comanche warrior who understood that some debts could only be paid forward. The mountains fell behind them as they descended toward the plains where Fort Laramie waited. But Eleanor knew she would carry those peaks with her always. In the wolf stone pressed against her heart, the territorial courthouse in Silver Creek. Settlement buzzed with an energy that had nothing to do with justice and everything to do with spectacle. Eleanor Hartwell adjusted her newly purchased dress, simple but respectable, a far cry from the tattered garments she'd worn when Samuel Redwing had found her, and tried to ignore the whispers that followed her through the corridors. News of the Wolf Woman, as some had taken to calling her, had spread through Wyoming Territory like wildfire. Judge Catherine Blackwood's chambers were a haven of order in the midst of chaos. The judge herself, a woman in her 50s with steel-gray hair and eyes that missed nothing, gestured Eleanor to a chair across from her massive oak desk. Samuel stood behind Eleanor, a silent but reassuring presence. "Miss Hartwell," Judge Blackwood began, her voice carrying the authority of someone who had fought for every ounce of respect in a profession dominated by men. "I've reviewed the documents you've provided, your father's journal, the letter from the Denver lawyer, and the testimonies gathered from Fort Laramie. Before we proceed to the formal hearing, I wanted to speak with you privately." Eleanor nodded, her hands folded in her lap to hide their trembling. The past week had been a whirlwind of legal procedures, depositions, and hostile encounters with the Prescott's attorney, Charles Dennison, a man whose reputation for bending the law to his client's advantage was well known throughout the territory. "The mining claim your father filed," Judge Blackwood continued, opening a leather-bound file, "is indeed legitimate. What's more interesting is his notation that the land contains significant mineral deposits, alongside what he termed sites of cultural importance to indigenous peoples. Or do you understand what this means?" "My father believed the land held sacred significance for several tribes," Eleanor replied. "He filed the claim not to exploit it, but to prevent others from doing so. He witnessed what happened when gold fever struck native lands, the destruction, the violence. He wanted to preserve these sites." Judge Blackwood leaned back in her chair, studying Eleanor with those penetrating eyes. "The Prescotts have filed a counterclaim. They assert that as your legal guardians following your father's death, they had the right to make decisions regarding his estate. They've also suggested that your experience in the wilderness may have affected your mental capacity." Heat flashed through Eleanor's cheeks. "They left me to die, Your Honor. They made their choice very clear. I was a burden to be discarded, not family to be protected." "I believe you," Judge Blackwood said simply. "But belief and legal proof are different animals. Dennison is already building a case that paints you as a confused young woman who misconstrued a difficult but necessary survival decision. He'll likely bring in medical experts to testify about the effects of isolation and trauma on the mind." Samuel stepped forward slightly. "I can testify to her mental clarity when I found her. And there are others, traders, soldiers from the fort who have interacted with Miss Hartwell since her rescue. Her mind is sound." Judge Blackwood's expression softened marginally. "Mr. Redwing, your testimony will indeed be valuable. However, we must be prepared for Dennison to challenge your credibility as well. He's already making noise about hostile Indians and their influence on a vulnerable white woman." The casual racism made Eleanor's stomach turn. She'd seen firsthand how Samuel was treated in the settlement, with suspicion at best, outright hostility at worst. That this good man, who had saved her life, should have his word questioned simply because of his heritage was yet another injustice in a growing list. "There's something else," Judge Blackwood said, pulling out another document. "This arrived yesterday from the territorial capital. It seems the Prescotts have some powerful friends. There's pressure being applied to have this case dismissed entirely, to have you declared incompetent to manage your father's estate." Eleanor felt the room spin slightly. After everything, surviving the winter, finding proof of her father's claims, making it to the legal system, to have it all snatched away by political maneuvering seemed unbearably cruel. "However," Judge Blackwood continued, a slight smile playing at the corners of her mouth, "I didn't fight my way to this bench by yielding to political pressure. And there's been an interesting development. A group of Comanche elders, led by someone called Chief Standing Bear, has filed a formal petition with the territorial government. They claim the lands in question as traditional sacred sites and support your father's intent to preserve them." Eleanor looked at Samuel in surprise. He gave an almost imperceptible nod. "My people have long memories," he said quietly, "and they honor those who respect the old ways." Judge Blackwood stood, moving to the window that overlooked Silver Creek's muddy main street. "The hearing is set for tomorrow. Dennison will pull every trick in his considerable repertoire. He'll attack your character, your sanity, your relationship. With Mr. Redwing, he'll paint the Prescotts as concerned family members who made a difficult choice in impossible circumstances. He'll try to turn your survival story into evidence of delusion." She turned back to face Eleanor, Are you prepared for that? For having your integrity questioned, your father's memory potentially tarnished, your time with the wolves dismissed as fantasy? Eleanor thought of Ghost, of the yellow eyes that had watched over her through those terrible weeks, of the gift of fur and stone she still carried next to her heart, of the choice between death and dignity, and how the wild had offered her both. "Yes," she said firmly, "I'm prepared." That evening, Eleanor and Samuel dined at the Territorial Hotel's restaurant, ignoring the stares and whispers of other patrons. The food was simple but good. Beef stew, fresh bread, apple pie, luxuries after weeks of survival rations and months of army provisions. "Tell me about your sister," Eleanor said suddenly, "the one my father saved." Samuel's expression softened. "Dancing Crow. She was 12 when the fever took so many of our band. Your father rode through a storm that killed 2 cavalry soldiers to reach us. He stayed until she and 7 others were past danger. She's married now, has 3 children. Of her own, she still speaks of the white doctor who saw people, not enemies." Eleanor smiled, imagining her father in that situation. He would have gone without hesitation, would have seen only the need, not the politics. He used to say that disease doesn't care about the color of your skin or the language of your prayers. Neither should a doctor. "Words your uncle would not understand," Samuel observed. As if summoned by the mention, William Prescott appeared at their table, his face florid with drink and anger. He'd aged in the months since abandoning Eleanor, strain showing in new lines around his eyes and mouth. "Eleanor," he said, swaying slightly, "we need to talk. Alone." "Anything you have to say can be said here," Eleanor replied coolly. William's eyes narrowed as he looked at Samuel. "This is family business, no place for the man who saved my life when my family left me to die," Eleanor finished. "I think he's earned the right to hear whatever fiction you're about to present." William gripped the edge of the table. "You don't understand what's at stake. Dennison's found things, records, witnesses. If you continue this foolishness, if you don't withdraw your claims and come back to family where you belong." "What family?" Eleanor interrupted. "The family that sold my inheritance, that abandoned me in a blizzard? That told authorities. I was accounted for when they knew I was missing. That family." William's mask of concern slipped, revealing the calculation beneath. "The claim is worth more than you know. There's not just gold, there's silver, copper, maybe more. Investors from back east are interested. With the right management—" "Your management?" Eleanor asked. "Family management," William corrected. "You're not equipped to handle something of this magnitude. A young woman, unmarried, clearly traumatized by your ordeal. The court will see that. Better to settle this quietly within the family." Samuel shifted slightly, a movement so subtle that only Eleanor noticed, but William took an involuntary step back. "My answer is no," Eleanor said firmly. "Whatever happens tomorrow, I will not sign away my father's legacy to satisfy your greed." William's face darkened. "You're making a mistake. Dennison has evidence that will destroy your credibility entirely. Things about your father, about his relationship with the savages, about why he really filed those claims." "Get out," Eleanor said quietly, "and don't come near me again." William left, but the threat lingered like smoke in the air. Eleanor pushed her pie away, appetite gone. "He's frightened," Samuel observed. "Desperate men make dangerous choices." That night, Eleanor couldn't sleep. She stood at her hotel window, watching the stars wheel overhead, thinking about the wolves. Were they hunting now, racing through the moonlit snow? Did Ghost ever think of the strange human he'd chosen to protect? A soft knock interrupted her reverie. She opened the door to find Winter Moon, one of the Comanche women who had come with Chief Standing Bear's delegation. The elderly woman's face was lined with years, but her eyes were sharp and kind. "You cannot sleep," Winter Moon said. It wasn't a question. Eleanor stepped aside, inviting her in. Winter Moon moved with the quiet grace of someone who had spent a lifetime reading the natural world's subtle signs. She settled into a chair by the window and gestured for Eleanor to join her. "I have dreams," Winter Moon said after a moment. "Old dreams, full of old wisdom. Tonight, they spoke of you." Eleanor waited, having learned that silence often invited more truth than questions. "The wolves that guarded you," Winter Moon continued, "they were sent by the spirits. Not all two-legged ones have forgotten the old contracts between human and animal. Your father honored these contracts. The wolves remembered." "But why me?" Eleanor asked, the question that had haunted her since Ghost first appeared. Why does the sun choose which flowers to warm first? Why does the rain bless one field more than another? Winter Moon smiled. "Sometimes the spirits test us not with hardship but with gifts. The test is whether we prove worthy of them." She reached into her pouch and withdrew something wrapped in soft leather. "This is for tomorrow, for the trial." She placed it in Eleanor's hands. Eleanor unwrapped it carefully, gasping at what lay within. It was a necklace, a simple leather cord holding a pendant made from what looked like a wolf's tooth, wrapped in silver wire with small turquoise beads. "The tooth is old," Winter Moon explained. "From a wolf who was friend to my grandmother's. Grandmother, it carries strong medicine. Wear it tomorrow. Let those who would call you mad see that you are claimed by powers they do not understand." After Winter Moon left, Eleanor held the necklace up to the starlight. The tooth was worn smooth with age, and she wondered about its history. What wolf had carried it? What stories it had witnessed? She fastened it around her neck, feeling its slight weight against her chest alongside the fur bundle Ghost had left her. Morning came too soon, bringing with it a tension that seemed to infect the very air. The courthouse was packed, every seat filled with curious observers, reporters from as far as Denver, and various interested parties. Eleanor took her place at the plaintiff's table, acutely aware of the Prescotts sitting with Dennison across the aisle. Judge Blackwood entered and the room fell silent. "This hearing," she began, "will determine the competency of Eleanor Hartwell to manage her inheritance, specifically the mining claims filed by her late father, Dr. Thomas Hartwell. We will also address the counterclaims filed by William and Margaret Prescott regarding guardianship and property rights." Dennison rose first, his appearance immaculate, his manner oozing false sympathy. "Your Honor, this is a tragic case of a young woman pushed beyond her mental limits by a terrible ordeal. While we deeply admire Miss Hartwell's survival, we must question whether her experiences have left her capable of making rational decisions regarding valuable property." He began to paint a picture that was masterful in its distortion. Eleanor became a fragile girl, overwhelmed by grief at her father's death, dependent on the kindness of relatives who had sacrificed to care for her. The decision to leave her at the trapper's cabin became a desperate choice made in impossible circumstances, with every intention of returning. "And what do we find when she is rescued?" Dennison continued, warming to his theme. "A young woman who claims to have been protected by wolves, who has formed an unusual attachment to a Comanche scout, who speaks of conspiracies and betrayals where there was only family concern and difficult choices." He called witnesses, a doctor who testified about the effects of isolation and hypothermia on the mind, without ever having examined Eleanor, a trader who claimed to have seen her talking to empty air at Fort Laramie, though Eleanor had never met the man, Margaret Prescott, who wept prettily as she described her poor, confused niece and the family's desperate worry. Through it all, Eleanor sat quietly, her hand occasionally touching the wolf-tooth pendant. She felt oddly calm, as if Ghost himself sat beside her, lending his wild strength. When Eleanor's lawyer, a young man named Davies, whom Judge Blackwood had recommended began the defense. The tide shifted slightly. He presented her father's journal with its meticulous notes about the land claims and his intentions. He called witnesses from Fort Laramie who testified to Eleanor's clarity of mind and knowledge of medicine. Then Samuel took the stand. Denison immediately objected to the testimony of a hostile Indian, but Judge Blackwood overruled him with a look that could have frozen fire. Samuel spoke simply and directly about finding Eleanor, about the wolf tracks surrounding the cabin, about her mental state and medical knowledge. His dignity in the face of Denison's increasingly hostile cross-examination impressed even the skeptical observers. "You claim wolves protected her," Denison sneered, "yet you provided no proof, no photographs, no physical evidence, just the word of a white woman and an Indian." Samuel met his gaze steadily. "I have tracked for 20 years. I know wolf sign from dog, coyote, or human making false tracks. What I saw was real. The wolves were there." And isn't it convenient," Denison continued, "that these magical wolves disappeared just as you arrived? Almost as if they never existed at all?" Before Samuel could answer, a commotion at the back of the courtroom drew everyone's attention. Chief Standing Bear had risen from his seat, his weathered face stern with authority. "I request permission to address this court," he said, his English careful but clear. Judge Blackwood looked surprised but nodded. "Approach, Chief Standing Bear." The Comanche leader walked forward, every eye in the courtroom following him. He stopped before the judge's bench and reached into his clothing, withdrawing something that made Eleanor's heart skip. It was a wolf pelt, pure white except for gray markings around the muzzle, Ghost's distinctive coloring. "This pelt," Standing Bear said, "was brought to our winter camp 3 days ago by hunters. They found the wolf dead, killed by a mountain lion. But here is what is strange. Around the wolf's neck was this." He held up a leather cord, knotted in a specific pattern. "This is the mark of my people. It is placed on animals that have performed great service, that are under spiritual protection. I placed such a mark myself on a wolf years ago when it warned our camp of approaching soldiers." The courtroom buzzed with whispers. Standing Bear continued. "The hunters backtracked the wolf's trail. It led to a cabin near Broken Ridge. The same cabin where this woman was found. The tracks showed a pack had lived there for weeks, circling always the same small shelter." He turned to face the room at large. "My people know the old stories. Sometimes the spirits send guardians in, animal form. This wolf," he held up the pelt, "was such a guardian. To deny this is to deny the evidence of our own eyes." The impact was immediate and dramatic. Even Denison seemed momentarily at a loss. Judge Blackwood leaned forward, studying the pelt with intense interest. "Chief Standing Bear," she said, "are you stating that this is physical evidence supporting Miss Hartwell's claims?" "I am stating," Standing Bear replied with dignity, "that the natural world keeps its own records. This pelt tells a story for those who can read it. The woman speaks truth." Denison rallied, trying to dismiss the evidence as native superstition, but the damage was done. The pelt was real, tangible, and Standing Bear's testimony carried a weight that transcended cultural boundaries. When Eleanor finally took the stand, she spoke from her heart. She told of her father's work, his respect for all people, his desire to preserve rather than exploit. She described her abandonment without bitterness, focusing instead on the strange miracle of the wolves' protection. "I cannot explain why they helped me," she said, her voice carrying to the farthest corners of the silent courtroom. "I can only tell you that they did. They led me to water, to fuel, to food. They stood guard through the darkest nights. They gave me the gift of survival when my own kind had left me to die." She looked directly at the Prescotts. "I bear you no ill will for your choice. People do desperate things when survival is at stake, but I will not let you profit from it. My father's claims were meant to protect sacred lands, not line pockets with gold. That intention will be honored. Denison's final attempt was to question Eleanor's relationship with Samuel, implying something improper in their connection. Eleanor's response was simple and devastating. Mr. Redwing found me, saved me, and treated me with more honor than my own blood relations. If that makes him suspect in your eyes, perhaps you should examine your own prejudices rather than question his character. The proceedings continued through the day, but the outcome was becoming clear. The combination of documentary evidence, witness testimony, and the dramatic presentation of Ghost's pelt had shifted the momentum entirely. In her closing statement, Judge Blackwood said something that would be quoted in newspapers throughout the territory. The law exists to serve justice, not convenience. The evidence shows that Dr. Thomas Hartwell filed legitimate claims with the intention of preservation, not exploitation. His daughter, Eleanor Hartwell, has demonstrated not only legal right to this inheritance, but the moral clarity to honor her father's wishes. She looked directly at Eleanor. Miss Hartwell, the court finds you fully competent to manage your affairs. The claims filed by the Prescotts are dismissed. Furthermore, this court recommends investigation into their handling of your father's estate during their brief guardianship. The courtroom erupted. Eleanor felt tears streaming down her face, tears of relief, vindication, and grief for all that had been lost and found again. Samuel's hand briefly touched her shoulder, a gesture of support that meant more than words. But the day's drama wasn't over. As people began to file out, Standing Bear approached Eleanor. He carried Ghost's pelt with reverence, and now he held it out to her. "This belongs to you," he said simply. "The hunter who killed the lion said the wolf fought to protect something even in death. A den, perhaps, or," he paused meaningfully, "or a trust unfulfilled. Take it. It is your right." Eleanor accepted the pelt with shaking hands. It was surprisingly heavy, the fur thick and soft. As her fingers sank into it, she felt a connection to those weeks, of survival, to the strange bond between human and animal that had saved her life. That evening, as Eleanor and Samuel walked along Silver Creek's main street, the judge's words still echoing in her ears, she felt the weight of the future settling on her shoulders. The legal battle was won, but the real work, honoring her father's legacy, protecting the sacred lands, building a life that bridged worlds, was just beginning. "What will you do now?" Samuel asked as they paused at the edge of town, looking out at the mountains painted gold by the setting sun. Eleanor touched the wolf-tooth pendant, then the fur bundle she still carried. "First, I'll ensure the land is properly protected. I'll work with Chief Standing Bear and others to document the sacred sites. Then," she turned to face him, "I'd like to establish a medical clinic. Not in a big city, but somewhere between worlds. A place where anyone can come for healing, regardless of race or ability to pay." Samuel nodded slowly. Such a place would need protection. The frontier doesn't always welcome those who challenge the established order. "No," Eleanor agreed, "but I've learned that protection can come from unexpected sources. And I won't be alone, will I?" The question hung between them, loaded with possibilities. Samuel's dark eyes met hers steadily. "You will never be alone," he said simply. "The wolves marked you as one who belongs to both worlds. I would be honored to help you walk that path." As they stood there, the first stars beginning to appear in the darkening sky, Eleanor heard it, faint but unmistakable. A wolf's howl, rising from the distant mountains. Not Ghost, but perhaps one of his pack, carrying on the ancient songs. She smiled, understanding finally that her story was not ending but beginning. The girl who had been abandoned in a blizzard had died in that trapper's cabin. What emerged was a woman claimed by wolves, saved by honor, and destined to forge a new path through a frontier that desperately needed healing. The future stretched before her, as vast and wild as the territory itself. There would be challenges. Those who resented a woman managing valuable land, those who questioned her alliances with the Comanche, those who would try to exploit rather than preserve. But she would face them all with the strength of the pack, the wisdom of the wilderness, and the legacy of a father who had seen humanity in all people. As she and Samuel walked back toward the hotel, Ghost's pelt draped over her arm like a banner. Of survival, Eleanor Hartwell knew that her true journey was just beginning. The wolves had shown her that family could be chosen, that protection could come from the wild heart of the world, and that sometimes the greatest strength came from embracing rather than conquering the untamed spaces, both in the land and in the soul. The moon rose full and bright over Silver Creek, casting long shadows on the muddy street. Somewhere in the mountains, wolves sang their ancient songs, and Eleanor Hartwell, claimed by the wild and tempered by trial, walked forward into her earned destiny. 6 months after the trial, Eleanor stood on a rise overlooking the valley that would become her life's work. The land stretched before her in waves of sage and grassland, bordered by stands of pine and aspen that marked the sacred sites her father had died protecting. Spring had transformed Wyoming Territory into a canvas of wildflowers and new growth. The harsh winter now, just a memory held in the last patches of snow clinging to north-facing slopes. Samuel Redwing sat his horse beside her, studying the terrain with a tracker's eye. Behind them, a small convoy of wagons carried the supplies and equipment that would establish the Hartwell Healing Sanctuary, a name Eleanor had chosen to honor. Both her father's medical legacy and the broader vision of healing between peoples that she hoped to achieve. The main building should go there, Eleanor said, pointing to a level area near a natural spring, where patients can see the mountains but be sheltered from the worst of the wind. The sacred sites remain untouched, as promised. Samuel nodded his approval. Good defensive position too. Clear sightlines, water access, natural barriers. Even in planning a place of healing, his warrior's instincts remained sharp. The past months had been a whirlwind of legal procedures, negotiations, and preparation. True to Judge Blackwood's ruling, Eleanor had gained full control of her father's estate, including the mining claims that had proven even more valuable than the Prescotts had imagined. But rather than exploit the mineral wealth, she had worked with Chief Standing Bear and other tribal leaders to create a unique trust, one that would preserve the sacred sites while using carefully managed resources to fund medical care for all who needed it. The sound of approaching horses drew their attention. Chief Standing Bear rode at the head of a delegation from multiple tribes, Comanche, Cheyenne, Arapaho, all of whom had ancestral connections to this land. With them came Winter Moon, who had become Eleanor's advisor in matters of traditional healing, and Dancing Crow, Samuel's sister, who had volunteered to help establish the sanctuary. "The council has reached a decision," Standing Bear announced as he drew rein beside them. His weathered face showed satisfaction. "The united tribes will support your sanctuary. Our healers will work alongside you, sharing knowledge as your father once shared his medicine with us." Eleanor felt tears prick her eyes. "The sanctuary will honor all forms of healing," she said. "Traditional and modern, spiritual and physical. Your medicine men and women will be welcome teachers, not curiosities to be studied." Winter Moon rode forward, her elderly frame straight with dignity. "I have brought something," she said, producing a wrapped bundle from her saddlebags. "The women of 5 tribes worked together to create this." Eleanor accepted the bundle, carefully unwrapping it to reveal a magnificent blanket. The weaving incorporated symbols from multiple tribal traditions alongside representations of wolves, medical instruments, and the mountains themselves. At the center was a stylized image of hands, different colors, reaching toward each other in healing. "This will hang in the sanctuary's main hall," Eleanor said, her voice thick with emotion, "a reminder of what we're building together." As the group made camp for the night, Eleanor found herself walking alone to a rocky outcropping that overlooked the valley. The sunset painted the landscape in shades of gold and purple, and she could see the shadow of what would be, buildings rising where now only grass waved, gardens of medicinal plants, a place where artificial boundaries between peoples might begin to dissolve. She wasn't surprised when she sensed Samuel's approach. He moved silently, but she had learned to feel his presence like a subtle change in the air. "Regrets?" he asked, settling beside her on the rocks. Eleanor considered the question seriously. "About choosing this path? No. But I think about the Prescotts sometimes. They're facing fraud charges now, their reputation destroyed. They brought it on themselves, but I can't help wondering if things could have been different." "They made their choices," Samuel said simply, "as we all do. Your uncle saw only gold, where your father saw sacred trust. That blindness created their fate, not you." The investigation following the trial had revealed the extent of the Prescott's deception. They had indeed sold portions of Eleanor's inheritance while claiming to be protecting it, had forged documents to support their guardianship claims, and had conspired with Denison and other territorial officials to seize the mining rights. The scandal had rocked Silver Creek's establishment. "Jeremiah Wolf is still out there," Eleanor said, naming the land speculator who had been the Prescott's silent partner. "Judge Blackwood warned he wouldn't give up easily." Samuel's hand moved unconsciously to the knife at his belt. "Let him. Come. He'll find this place well protected." As if summoned by their conversation, a rider appeared on the horizon, moving fast toward their camp. Samuel rose instantly, ready for trouble, but relaxed as he recognized the rider, one of Standing Bear's scouts. The young man reined in hard, his horse lathered with sweat. "Chief," he gasped, addressing Standing Bear, who had emerged from his tent, "riders coming from the east. 20 men, maybe more, armed like soldiers but not in uniform." Eleanor felt her heart sink. Wolf had finally made his move. The camp transformed instantly from peaceful gathering to military preparation. Warriors checked weapons, scouts dispersed to high ground, and the women and children were moved to defensible positions. Eleanor found herself at the center of a protective circle, a position that chafed despite understanding its necessity. "I should speak with them," she insisted, as Standing Bear and Samuel conferred in rapid Comanche. "This is my fight." "This stopped being only your fight when you chose to protect sacred land," Standing Bear replied. "An attack on you is an attack, on all of us now." Through the gathering darkness, Eleanor could see the dust cloud of approaching riders. The peaceful valley that was to house her sanctuary suddenly felt like a battlefield waiting to happen. "There is another way, Winter," Moon said suddenly. All eyes turned to the elderly woman. "The old way, challenged by single combat. It would appeal to men like this wolf, their pride, their belief in might over right." Samuel's expression hardened. "I'll fight for her." "No," Eleanor said firmly. "I won't have blood spilled in my name. There has to be—" A shout from one of the scouts cut her off. The riders had stopped just out of rifle range, their torches creating a line of fire in the darkness. A single rider broke from the group, approaching under a white flag. Eleanor recognized Lucas Bennett, Wolf's tracker and enforcer. He stopped just within shouting distance, his scarred face twisted in what might have been meant as a smile. "Jeremiah Wolf requests parley," he called out, "with Miss Hartwell alone." The refusal from Eleanor's protectors was immediate and unanimous, but she raised her hand for silence. "What are his terms?" "Simple enough," Bennett replied. "A conversation, just the two of you. If he can't convince you to be reasonable about the land rights, he'll leave peacefully. You have his word." Samuel snorted. The word of a snake. But Eleanor was remembering her father's teachings about avoiding violence when possible, about finding solutions that preserve dignity on all sides. "I'll meet him," she said, ignoring the protests around her. "But not alone. Mr. Redwing comes with me, and we meet in neutral ground, there, by those 3 cottonwoods." Bennett considered, then nodded. "1 hour, come armed if you like. Won't help if you force us to take what's ours by right." As Bennett rode back to his group, Eleanor faced her allies' disapproval. "I have to try," she said simply. "If there's a chance to avoid bloodshed, I have to take it." An hour later, Eleanor and Samuel approached the designated meeting place. Wolf was already there, a tall man in his 50s with silver hair and the bearing of someone accustomed to getting his way. Bennett stood behind him, hand resting casually on his pistol. "Miss Hartwell," Wolf said, touching his hat brim with mock courtesy. "You're looking well for someone who survived such an ordeal. The wilderness seems to agree with you." "State your business, Mr. Wolf," Eleanor replied coolly. Wolf's smile never reached his eyes. "Direct. I admire that. Very well. I'm here to make you rich beyond your wildest dreams. The mineral surveys my people have conducted, quietly of course, show deposits worth millions, enough to make us all wealthy. The land isn't for sale. Everything is for sale, my dear. It's simply a matter of price. I'm prepared to offer you a full partnership, 40% of all profits. You'd never have to work again, could build a dozen hospitals if you wished." Eleanor felt the weight of Ghost's pelt, which she wore as a cloak against the evening chill. "And the sacred sites," Wolf waved dismissively. "Religious nonsense. These savages have dozens of sacred sites. They can find new ones. Progress doesn't stop for primitive superstitions." The casual bigotry made Eleanor's decision even firmer. "My answer is no, now and always." Wolf's genial mask slipped. "Then you're a fool, and fools don't last long out here." He glanced meaningfully at the lights of her camp. "Accidents happen. Indian attacks, fires, all sorts of tragedies can befall an isolated settlement." Samuel stepped forward, his hand dropping to his knife. "You threaten her again, and you won't leave this meeting alive." "Threatening?" Wolf's laugh was unpleasant. "I'm simply observing the harsh realities of frontier life, but perhaps there's another solution." His eyes fixed on Eleanor with calculating intensity. "Marry me." The suggestion was so unexpected that Eleanor actually laughed. "I beg your pardon." "Think about it logically," Wolf continued, warming to his theme. "A woman alone trying to manage valuable property surrounded by hostiles. You need protection, legitimacy. As my wife, you'd have both. The sanctuary could continue, under proper supervision, of course. The mineral rights would be developed responsibly. Everyone wins." Eleanor stared at him, seeing clearly the type of man who viewed everything, land, resources, even people, as commodities to be acquired and exploited. "Mr. Wolf," she said finally, "I would rather die in the wilderness than live in a cage of your making. We're done here." As she turned to leave, Wolf's voice hardened. "You're making a mistake, Miss Hartwell. I came here in good faith, offered reasonable terms. What happens next is on your head." Eleanor paused, looking back at him. "No, Mr. Wolf. What happens next is on yours. The law supports my claim. The United Tribes stand with me, and I am not the naive girl you seem to think I am. Threaten my people again, and you'll learn that the wilderness taught me more than mere survival." The ride back to camp was tense, Samuel scanning the darkness for any sign of ambush. But Wolf's men held their position, watching as Eleanor and her protector returned safely to their lines. "He won't give up," Samuel said quietly. "Men like him never do." "I know," Eleanor replied, "but neither will I." That night, as the camp settled into uneasy sleep with doubled guards, Eleanor found herself unable to rest. She walked among the sleeping forms of her allies, Comanche warriors who had chosen to stand with her, tribal healers who shared her vision of bridging worlds, the handful of white settlers who had volunteered to help build the sanctuary. At the edge of camp, she found Wintermoon sitting beside a small fire, grinding herbs in a stone bowl. The elderly woman looked up at Eleanor's approach and patted the ground beside her. "You did well tonight," Wintermoon said. "Spoke with strength, not anger. Your father's spirit would be proud." "I'm frightened," Eleanor admitted, surprising herself with the confession. "Not of Wolf exactly, but of what stopping him might cost. People could die because of my stubbornness." Wintermoon continued her grinding, the rhythmic sound oddly soothing. "People die anyway. The question is whether they die for something worthy. These warriors, they don't fight for your land or your gold. They fight for the dream you carry, a place where all peoples might meet as equals, where healing transcends the boundaries men create." "But what if I'm wrong? What if I'm just a naive idealist tilting at windmills?" The old woman smiled. "What if the wolves who saved you were just ordinary animals? What if your father's medicine was just roots and leaves? What if the sunrise tomorrow is just another day? Some things we take on faith, child. Some dreams are worth the dreaming, even if they fail." A sound in the darkness made them both turn, a wolf's howl, distant but clear, rising from the mountains. It was joined by another, then another, until the night filled with their ancient song. Eleanor felt the hair rise on her arms. These weren't the wolves from her ordeal. Ghost's pack had moved on with the seasons. But the sound still stirred. Something deep within her, a connection to the wild strength that had sustained her through the darkest time of her life. "They sing for you," Wintermoon said softly. "The spirits remember their own." As if the howling were a signal, one of the scouts came running. "Movement in Wolf's camp," he reported. "They're pulling back, heading east." Eleanor felt a mixture of relief and suspicion. All of them. All but 5 men left as rear guard. The main force is definitely withdrawing. By dawn, it was confirmed. Wolf's small army had departed in the night, leaving only a handful of observers at a respectful distance. The threat hadn't vanished, but it had retreated, for now. "He'll try legal means next," Samuel predicted as they watched the dust of the departing riders. "Political pressure, hired lawyers, false claims." "Let him," Eleanor said with more confidence than she felt. Judge Blackwood saw through the Prescott schemes. The law is on our side. But 3 days later, a courier arrived from Silver Creek with disturbing news. Judge Blackwood had been removed from the bench, replaced by a political appointee named Harrison Crawley, a man known to be in Wolf's pocket. Moreover, new claims had been filed challenging Eleanor's ownership, asserting prior rights based on technicalities in her father's original surveys. Standing Bear called a council that night. Warriors and elders from multiple tribes gathered around the central fire, their faces grave in the flickering light. Eleanor sat in the place of honor, wearing Ghost's pelt and the wolf-tooth necklace, symbols of her unique position between worlds. "The white man's law bends like grass in the wind," Standing Bear observed. "Always it favors those with gold. To buy influence. This is why we have fought to keep our own justice." "There must be something we can do," Eleanor insisted. "Appeals to higher courts, letters to newspapers in the East, public pressure. All of which take time," Samuel interjected. Time Wolf will use to strengthen his position, to turn more officials to his cause. Dancing Crow, who had remained silent until now, suddenly spoke. There is another way, older than white man's courts, more binding than papers and seals. She looked directly at Eleanor. The trial of the mountain. A murmur ran through the assembled natives. Eleanor looked to Wintermoon for explanation. An ancient rite, the old woman said slowly. When disputes threaten the people, when justice cannot be found in ordinary ways, the spirits themselves are asked to judge. The claimants undergo trials, tests of endurance, wisdom, courage. The one who succeeds gains not just legal right, but spiritual authority. No man, white or native, would dare challenge such a judgment. It's been generations since anyone attempted it, Standing Bear added. The trials are difficult, dangerous. Not all who enter them return. Eleanor felt a chill that had nothing to do with the night air. What kind of trials? 3 tests, Wintermoon explained. One of body, surviving alone in the sacred caves for 3 days without food or water, facing whatever visions come. One of mind, solving the riddles of the ancient stones, proving wisdom beyond mere knowledge. One of spirit, we do not speak of it to those who have not earned the right to know. The fire crackled in the silence that followed. Eleanor knew they were offering her a way forward, but also testing her resolve. How far would she go to protect this dream of sanctuary? If I succeed, she said slowly, would Wolf accept the outcome? Standing Bear nodded grimly. He would have no choice. The territorial government itself recognizes tribal sovereignty in spiritual matters, and the story would spread. Newspapers from here to Washington would carry it. He could fight a legal claim, but not a legend. Eleanor stood, feeling the weight of decision. The logical part of her mind, trained by her father in scientific thinking, recoiled at the idea of submitting to mystical trials. But the part of her that had survived a blizzard with wolf guardians, that had seen the connections between all living things, recognized the deeper truth in what was being offered. I'll do it, she said simply. The reaction was immediate. Samuel stepped forward, protest clear on his face, but she raised a hand to stop him. This isn't just about land or law anymore, she said. It's about proving that the vision we share, all of us, native and white alike, is worth any trial. If I ask others to risk their lives for this dream, I must be willing to risk my own. Wintermoon rose, her ancient joints creaking. The moon is right, she pronounced. If you are certain, the trials can begin with tomorrow's sunset. That night, Eleanor walked alone to the edge of camp, needing solitude to prepare for what lay ahead. She wasn't surprised when Samuel found her there, standing beneath the vast canopy of stars. You don't have to do this, he said quietly. Yes, I do. She turned to face him, seeing the concern in his dark eyes. Not just for the sanctuary or the land, for myself. I need to know if the girl who survived that blizzard has grown into someone worthy of the trust so many have placed in her. Samuel was quiet for a long moment. Then he reached into his pouch and withdrew something, a small carved figure of a wolf, no bigger than his thumb, made from some dark stone she didn't recognize. This was my grandfather's, he said, pressing it into her hand. He carved it during his own spirit trial many years ago. He said it reminded him that we are never truly alone, even in our loneliest moments. Eleanor closed her fingers around the small wolf, feeling its worn surfaces. Thank you, she whispered. Eleanor, Samuel began, then stopped, seeming to struggle with words. When you return from the trials, not if when, there's something I need to tell you. Something I should have said before now. She waited, heart beating faster, but he shook his head. After, he said firmly, you need no distractions now. Just come back to us. to me." The next evening, as the sun painted the mountains crimson, Eleanor stood before the entrance to the sacred caves. She had been ritually prepared by the tribal women. Bathed in spring water, dressed in simple leather garments, her hair braided with eagle feathers and wolf fur. The wolf-tooth necklace remained around her neck, joined now by Samuel's carved stone wolf. The entire camp had gathered to witness her departure. Standing Bear spoke the formal words in Comanche, then translated for those who didn't understand. "The mountain calls. The spirits wait. Let she who seeks judgment enter with pure heart and strong will. May wisdom guide her path." Eleanor took a deep breath, looked once more at the faces of those who had become her family. Samuel's intense gaze, Winter Moon's encouraging nod, Dancing Crow's fierce smile, then stepped into the darkness of the cave. Behind her she heard the ritual drumming begin, a rhythm that seemed to match her heartbeat. Ahead lay 3 trials that would test everything she had learned, everything she had become. The first test had begun. As darkness swallowed her and the drumming faded with distance, Eleanor felt a familiar presence. Not physical, but a sensation. She recognized the feeling of being watched over, protected. Ghost might be gone, his pelt now her cloak of courage, but the spirit of the wolf remained. She pressed deeper into the mountain's heart, ready to face whatever judgment awaited. The girl who had been abandoned in a blizzard was about to discover whether she had truly been reborn as a woman worthy of bridging worlds. The future of the sanctuary, the fate of sacred lands, the dreams of many peoples, all now rested on her ability to survive, not just physically, but to emerge transformed. By trials designed to strip away everything but essential truth. In the darkness ahead, Eleanor thought she heard an echo of wolf song, welcoming her to the ancient testing ground where human and spirit met. The mountain had accepted her challenge. Now all that remained was to prove worthy of its judgment. The darkness inside the sacred caves was absolute, a living thing that pressed against Eleanor's skin like black silk. She had been walking for hours, guided only by touch along the rough stone walls and the subtle movement of air that suggested passages and openings. The ritual preparation had included blindfolding her for a full day before entering, allowing her other senses to sharpen, but nothing could fully prepare someone for this complete absence of light. Hunger already gnawed at her stomach, and thirst made her throat feel like sandpaper. 3 days without food or water in total darkness. The first trial was designed to strip away everything external, leaving only the core of who she was. As Eleanor felt her way forward, she remembered Winter Moon's words. The body's needs will scream loudest at first, but when they quiet, that's when the real test begins. Time became fluid in the darkness. Was it hours or days since she'd entered? The drumming that had marked her descent had long since faded, leaving only the sound of her own breathing and the occasional drip of water somewhere in the cave system, a torment to her thirst, but impossibly distant, directionless in the echoing chambers. Eleanor found a relatively smooth section of wall and sat, conserving energy. In the absolute darkness, her mind began to conjure images, memories at first, then increasingly strange visions. She saw her father working at his desk, but his face kept shifting, becoming sometimes Ghost's lupine features, sometimes Samuel's steady gaze. The cave walls seemed to breathe around her, expanding and contracting like the ribs of some enormous beast. The visions will come, Winter Moon had warned. Some true, some false. The trial is to know the difference. As Eleanor's body weakened from deprivation, the visions intensified. She saw herself as a child, holding her father's hand as he made his rounds. She felt again the fever that had taken her parents, but this time she could see the illness as a living thing, a shadow with tendrils that reached for her even now. When she tried to brush it away, her hand passed through empty air. Days blended into a single endless night. Eleanor's lips cracked, her tongue swollen. The carved wolf Samuel had given her became her anchor to reality, its smooth surface worn smoother still by her constant touch. Sometimes she thought she heard wolves howling in the distance, but sound in the caves was deceptive, possibly just wind through distant passages or the echo of her own ragged breathing. In her delirium, Eleanor found herself speaking aloud, conversing with absent friends. She told her father about the sanctuary plans, argued with the Prescotts about their betrayal, explained to Samuel why she had to undertake these trials. The cave swallowed her words without echo, making her wonder if she had spoken at all. Then, just when the boundary between waking and sleeping, reality and vision, had completely dissolved, Eleanor heard something that made her heart race. Footsteps. Not the padding of wolf paws or the shuffle of her own movement, but deliberate, measured human steps. "Who's there?" she called, her voice a harsh croak. The footsteps stopped. Then, impossibly, she heard her father's voice. "Eleanor? Darling, what are you doing in this dark place?" Tears streamed down her face. "Papa, but you're dead?" "Yes, I suppose I am. But death isn't the ending we thought it was, is it? Not here in the heart of the mountain." Eleanor reached toward the voice, but her hands found only air. "I'm so lost, Papa. I don't know if I can do this." "You were lost once before," her father's voice reminded her. "In a blizzard, abandoned by those who should have protected you, but you survived. The wolves saved me. Did they? Or did they simply show you the strength that was always within? Eleanor, my dear daughter, the real trial isn't surviving this darkness. It's understanding why you're here at all." The vision of her father, if that's what it was, fell silent. Eleanor waited, hoping for more, but only the cave's breathing filled the space around her. She pressed her palms against her eyes, seeing phosphorescent patterns dance across her vision, and tried to focus on his words. Why was she here? Not just in these caves, but on this path at all. The easy answer was to save the land, to build the sanctuary. But her father's spectral voice was right. There was something deeper. Eleanor thought back to that terrible night, in the blizzard, to the moment when she had faced certain death. She hadn't prayed for rescue or raged against the unfairness. Instead, she had felt a strange peace, an acceptance that if this was her end, she would meet it with dignity. The wolves had found her in that state, not broken by despair, but somehow transcendent in her acceptance. "I'm here because I chose to be," she said aloud to the darkness, "not just in these caves, but in this life. Every step since that blizzard has been a choice to embrace rather than merely endure." As if her words were a key, the quality of the darkness changed. It was still absolute, but somehow less oppressive. Eleanor's thirst remained, her hunger still gnawed, but they had become simple facts rather than overwhelming demands. Time passed, hours or days, she couldn't tell. Eleanor found herself entering a state beyond ordinary consciousness, where the boundaries of self became permeable. She felt connected to the stone around her, to the mountain's ancient patience, to the countless beings who had undergone similar trials across the generations. In that state, she understood something fundamental. The trial wasn't about suffering, but about transformation. When the vision of the wolf appeared, not ghost, but a larger, more primal creature with eyes like golden stars, Eleanor felt no surprise. The wolf sat before her in the darkness, somehow visible despite the absence of light, its presence both comforting and challenging. "You know me," the wolf said, its voice resonating inside her mind rather than her ears. "You're the spirit of this place," Eleanor replied, "the guardian of the trials." "I am what I am. The question is, what are you?" Eleanor considered carefully. "I am a healer's daughter. I am a survivor. I am someone who seeks to bridge worlds. Those are roles, not identity. Dig deeper. The challenge frustrated her, but Eleanor forced herself to look beyond the obvious answers. What was she at the most fundamental level? The silence stretched as she searched within. "I am a choice," she said finally. "A continuous choice to transform pain into purpose, isolation into connection, fear into understanding." The wolf's eyes seemed to brighten. "And what do you choose now?" Eleanor thought of Samuel waiting outside, of Winter Moon's patient teaching, of Standing Bear's trust. She thought of the sanctuary that existed now only in dreams and plans, of the people it might heal, the wounds it might bind. "I choose to continue," she said simply, "to emerge from this darkness not as I entered, but as what I might become." The wolf rose, its massive form filling the cave passage. "Then follow." Eleanor stood on shaking legs and followed the spectral wolf through passages she couldn't see, but somehow no longer feared. The darkness remained absolute, but she moved with new confidence, trusting in guidance beyond mere sight. After what might have been hours, Eleanor detected a change, the faintest suggestion of light ahead, grey rather than black. As she moved toward it, the wolf's form began to fade. "Remember," its voice echoed in her mind, "the darkness, you've survived lives within you now. It is not your enemy, but your teacher." Die. Eleanor emerged from the caves as the sun was setting on the third day, her eyes burning even in the gentle twilight. She collapsed at the cave entrance, where Winter Moon and other medicine women waited with water and thin broth. They bathed. Her face gave her tiny sips of liquid and wrapped her in soft blankets. "Rest now," Winter Moon murmured. "You have passed the first trial." 2 days of recovery followed, during which Eleanor was kept isolated from the main camp, attended only by the medicine women. Her body gradually accepted food again, her strength slowly returning. On the morning of the third day, she was led to a circle of standing stones she had never seen before, ancient monoliths covered in symbols that seemed to shift in the changing light. Standing Bear waited there, along with 5 tribal elders Eleanor didn't recognize. Samuel was notably absent, as were all others from the camp. This trial, it seemed, would be witnessed only by those who served as official judges. "The trial of mind begins," Standing Bear announced formally. "The stones hold wisdom from the time before memory. To pass, you must read what cannot be read, solve what has no solution, and answer the question that has never been asked." Eleanor studied the stones, trying to make sense of the symbols. They weren't from any language she recognized, neither Native American pictographs nor any European script. As she circled the monoliths, the symbols seemed to rearrange themselves, forming new patterns with each change of perspective. Hours passed as Eleanor struggled with the puzzle. The sun traced its arc overhead while she examined every angle, every possible interpretation. The stones remained stubbornly cryptic, their message locked away like a secret in a forgotten tongue. Frustration built as the day wore on. Eleanor's mind, sharpened by her father's scientific training, attacked the problem from every logical direction. She looked for mathematical patterns, linguistic structures, astronomical alignments. Nothing yielded meaning. As sunset approached, painting the stones in shades of gold and crimson, Eleanor finally stopped her frantic analysis. She stood in the center of the circle, closed her eyes, and simply breathed. The trial of body had taught her that sometimes understanding came not through effort, but through acceptance. When she opened her eyes, she no longer tried to decipher the symbols. Instead, she let her gaze go soft, taking in the entire circle as a single entity rather than separate stones. And in that moment of surrendered perception, she saw it. The symbols weren't meant to be read individually. Together, they formed a map, not of physical geography, but of relationship. The patterns showed connections between earth and sky, between human and animal, between past and future. The stones weren't holding information to be extracted, but demonstrating a way of seeing. "The stones say nothing," Eleanor announced to the watching elders. "They are nothing, but in their arrangement, in the spaces between them, in how they change with light and perspective, there lies the teaching. They show us that wisdom isn't in the knowing, but in the seeing. Not in the answer, but in the relationship between question and questioner." A long silence followed her words. Then Standing Bear nodded slowly. "How do you read what cannot be read? By understanding that reading itself is a limited concept. True knowledge encompasses more than what can be captured in symbols. How do you solve what has no solution? By recognizing that the absence of solution is itself the answer. Some things are meant to be lived with, not solved. And what is the question that has never been asked?" Eleanor paused, sensing this was the crucial moment. She thought of her journey, of all that had led her to this circle of ancient stones. The question that has never been asked is the one we're afraid to voice. What if everything we think we know is just one way of seeing? The stones force us to confront that possibility. The elders exchanged glances. One of them, a woman with hair white as fresh snow, spoke for the first time. "You have passed the trial of mind, but knowledge without wisdom is dangerous. The final trial will determine if you can unite what you have learned with what you are." That night, Eleanor was taken to a sweat lodge for purification. As the heat built and the sacred herbs filled the air with their pungent smoke, Winter Moon prepared her for what was to come. "The trial of spirit cannot be explained," the old woman said. "It is different for each who faces it. Some see their greatest fear made manifest. Others confront the shadow of what they might become. Still others face a choice that will define their path forever." Eleanor nodded, sweat streaming down her face in the intense heat. "How do I prepare for something I can't understand?" "You don't. You simply trust that everything until now has been preparation enough." When they emerged from the sweat lodge, the full moon had risen, turning the landscape silver white. Eleanor was led to a sacred grove where a single teepee had been erected. The buffalo hide covering was painted with images that seemed to move in the moonlight. Wolves running, eagles soaring, spirits dancing. "Enter alone," Standing Bear instructed. "What happens within is between you and the spirits. We will wait here until you emerge, or until the spirits claim you." Eleanor ducked through the entrance flap, and immediately the world transformed. The interior of the teepee was impossibly vast, stretching away into star-filled distances that defied physical law. In the center, a fire burned with flames of blue and silver, casting no heat but filling the space with an otherworldly light. Sitting across from the fire was a figure Eleanor recognized but had never expected to see. Again, Ghost, the white wolf who had protected her through the blizzard, sat in his full, magnificent form, his eyes holding the same ancient wisdom she remembered. "You're dead," Eleanor said, touching the pelt she still wore. Standing Bear brought your fur to the trial. "Death, life, human concepts," Ghost replied, his voice deep and resonant in her mind. "I am what I have always been, a guardian spirit in wolf form. The physical body was merely convenience." Eleanor sank to her knees across from the spectral wolf. "Why did you save me? The better question is why you were worth saving. But you still don't understand, do you? You still see yourself as the rescued rather than the rescuer." "I don't follow." Ghost's eyes seemed to pierce through her. "Who did you really save in that blizzard, Eleanor? Whose spirit was truly lost until you showed them another way?" Understanding dawned slowly. The pack. You were disconnected, losing your purpose, The old contracts between human and animal were breaking down, leaving you adrift. "We saved each other," Ghost confirmed. "Your determination to survive with dignity, without hatred for those who abandoned you, reminded us of why the ancient bonds were forged. In protecting you, we remembered our own purpose." The fire between them flared higher, and in its flames, Eleanor saw images. Herself working in the sanctuary, healing both bodies and the rifts between peoples. She saw Samuel at her side, their partnership deepening into something profound. She saw children of all races learning together, saw the sacred lands preserved, saw a future where the artificial boundaries between cultures began to dissolve. But the flames showed other possibilities too. The sanctuary failing, destroyed by greed and prejudice, herself bitter and alone, having sacrificed love for an impossible dream. The land exploited despite her efforts, the sacred sites desecrated. "Every choice creates a world," Ghost said. "The question is, which world will you choose to make real?" "I've already chosen," Eleanor replied. "That's why I'm here." "Have you? Or are you still that abandoned woman in the cabin, reacting to others' choices rather than making your own?" The challenge stung because it held truth. Even her decision to undergo these trials had been reactive, a response to Wolf's threats rather than a purely self-determined choice. Ghost stood, his massive form towering over her. "The final test is this. Choose your path not from fear or reaction, but from the deepest truth of who you are, and know that whatever you choose for all those whose lives you touch." The fire suddenly extinguished, plunging the space into darkness. But this darkness was different from the cave, pregnant with possibility rather than empty. In it, Eleanor felt the presence of all those who had shaped her journey, her father, Samuel, Wintermoon, Standing Bear, even the Prescotts in their way. But more than that, she felt the presence of those yet to come, future generations, who would inherit whatever world she helped create. "I choose," she said into the darkness, her voice strong and clear, "not from fear of failure, but from love of possibility. I choose to build rather than defend, to include rather than exclude, to heal rather than wound. I choose the path of the bridge builder, knowing it will be hard, knowing I may fail, but choosing it anyway because it aligns with the deepest truth of who I am." Light returned gradually, not the strange fire of visions, but the ordinary light of dawn filtering through the teepee's smoke hole. Eleanor found herself alone, sitting on simple buffalo robes, the painted walls showing normal dimensions. But clutched in her hand was something that hadn't been there before. A small silver amulet in the shape of a wolf, its eyes set with turquoise stones. She emerged from the teepee to find the entire camp assembled, having maintained vigil through the night. Samuel stood in the front rank, his face showing the strain of worry and sleeplessness. When he saw her, relief transformed his features. Standing Bear stepped forward. "The trials are complete. The spirits have spoken through your survival, your understanding, and your choice. Eleanor Hartwell, you have earned the right to speak. For this land, to build upon it, to serve as bridge between worlds." A celebration began. Drums beating and voices raised in songs Eleanor didn't understand, but felt in her bones. But before she could be swept up in it, Samuel caught her arm. "We need to talk," he said urgently. "While you were in the trials, Wolf made his move. He's brought federal marshals, claims he has government backing to seize the land for national development. They're 2 days' ride from here." Eleanor felt a moment of despair. Had all of this been for nothing? Then she noticed the expression on Samuel's face, not defeat, but something like grim satisfaction. "There's more," he continued. "Judge Blackwood, the real Judge Blackwood, sent word. She never was removed from the bench. That was Wolf's deception. She's coming personally with a federal judicial order supporting your claim. And He paused, a smile breaking through. Newspapers from Denver to Chicago have picked up the story. The Wolf Woman's Trial, they're calling it. Public opinion is turning strongly in your favor. Eleanor swayed slightly, exhaustion finally catching. Up with her. Samuel steadied her, his arms strong around her waist. Also, he added softly, there's something I promised to tell you after the trials. Despite everything, the exhaustion, the looming confrontation, the uncertainty ahead, Eleanor found herself smiling. Tell me. I love you, Samuel said simply. I have since the day I found you in the snow, though it took me time to admit it. Whatever comes next, I want to face it beside you, not as protector or guide, but as partner, if you'll have me. Eleanor reached up to touch his face, seeing in his eyes the same mixture of strength and vulnerability she felt in herself. Yes, she said, to all of it. The partnership, the love, the uncertain future. Yes. 2 days later, the confrontation came to a head. Wolf arrived with his marshals just hours before Judge Blackwood's party. The two groups faced each other across the meadow that would become the sanctuary's heart, legal documents and weapons bristling on both sides. Eleanor stood between them, wearing Ghost's pelt and the silver wolf amulet, flanked by Samuel and Standing Bear. She had prepared no speech, trusting that the right words would come. Mr. Wolf, she began, her voice carrying clearly across the space. You see this land as a resource to be exploited. I see it as a trust to be honored. You believe ownership means the right to destroy. I believe it means the responsibility to preserve. We will never agree on these things, Wolf sneered. Pretty words won't change the law. I have federal backing. Based on forged documents, Judge Blackwood interrupted, stepping forward. Mr. Wolf, I have here warrants for your arrest on charges of fraud, bribery, and conspiracy. Your federal backing consists of officials who are at this moment being removed from their positions. The marshals, seeing which way the wind was blowing, began to distance themselves from Wolf. But the land speculator wasn't finished. You think you've won? He snarled at Eleanor. A woman playing at being a man, pretending these savages are equals? Society will never accept what you're trying to build. You'll fail, and when you do, I'll be waiting. Eleanor felt the old anger rise, but then remembered Ghost's words about choosing from truth rather than reaction. Perhaps I will fail, she said calmly. Perhaps the sanctuary will never become what I envision, but the attempt itself has value. And every small success, every person healed, every bridge built between communities, those matter. They matter. More than your gold, Mr. Wolf, more than your narrow vision of progress. She gestured to the gathering behind her, Native Americans from multiple tribes, white settlers who supported the sanctuary, people of mixed heritage like Samuel. Look, at us. We're already proof that different peoples can work together when united by purpose rather than divided by prejudice. That's what terrifies you, isn't it? Not that we'll fail, but that we'll succeed. Judge Blackwood stepped forward with the marshals who had transferred their allegiance. Jeremiah Wolf, you're under arrest. These officers will escort you back to Denver to face trial. As Wolf was led away, still ranting about corruption and conspiracy, Eleanor felt a weight lift from her shoulders. The legal battle was won. The real work could begin. 5 years later, the Hartwell Healing Sanctuary stood complete, its buildings blending traditional and modern architecture in harmony with the landscape. The main hospital featured treatment rooms equipped with contemporary medical equipment, alongside spaces for traditional healing practices. Gardens of medicinal plants, both native and imported, flourished under the care of healers from various traditions. Eleanor stood on the same rise where she had first envisioned this place, now watching as patients and healers moved between buildings. A Cheyenne child with a broken arm received treatment from a white doctor trained in the latest techniques. An elderly prospector found relief for chronic pain through acupuncture, administered by a Chinese healer who had joined the staff. A cavalry officer's wife learned herbal remedies from Wintermoon's apprentices. Regrets? Samuel asked, joining her. He wore a mixture of traditional and modern clothing, as did many at the sanctuary, a visual representation of the cultural blending that had become their hallmark. Eleanor laughed, the sound free and genuine. None. Challenges, yes. Setbacks, certainly. But no regrets. Their own lives had blended as seamlessly as the sanctuary's architecture. They had married in a ceremony that combined Christian and Comanche traditions, witnessed by both communities. Their daughter, 2-year-old, Sarah, played in the meadow below, watched over by a mixed group of children from the sanctuary's school. "Letter from your cousin Clara," Samuel said, handing her an envelope. "Forwarded from Denver." Eleanor read quickly, then summarized for Samuel. "She married a banker in San Francisco. Seems happy. She says her parents are still in prison, likely to remain there for several more years. She asks if I can forgive them." "Can you?" Eleanor considered. "I forgave them long ago. Not for their sake, but for mine. Carrying that anger would have poisoned everything we've built here." She touched the wolf-tooth necklace she still wore. "The wolves taught me that survival sometimes means letting go of what hurts us." A commotion near the main building drew their attention. A delegation was arriving, territorial officials by their dress, accompanied by what looked like foreign dignitaries. "The Japanese medical delegation," Samuel remembered. "They've come to study how we integrate different healing traditions." As they walked down to greet the visitors, Eleanor reflected on how far they had all come. The sanctuary had become internationally known, visited by medical professionals eager to learn about their integrated approach to healing. More importantly, it had become a model for how different communities could coexist and thrive together. Standing Bear, now serving as the sanctuary's elder council leader, met them at the main entrance. "They bring gifts," he reported with amusement, "and many questions about the wolf woman who started all this." Eleanor smiled. The story of her survival and trials had indeed become legend, told and retold with various embellishments. She didn't mind. If the tale inspired others to bridge differences and seek understanding, then it served a purpose beyond mere history. That evening, as the Japanese delegation joined them for a feast combining cuisines from multiple traditions, Eleanor found herself watching the gathering with deep satisfaction. Conversations flowed in several languages, translations offered, freely, laughter bridging any gaps in understanding. Wintermoon, now ancient but still sharp-minded, caught her eye across the crowded room. The old woman raised her cup in a small salute, and Eleanor understood the message. "This is what the Spirit saw in you. This is why the trials were necessary. This is the world you chose to create." Later, as Eleanor and Samuel walked the sanctuary grounds in the moonlight, they paused at the memorial garden. Here stood markers for all those who had contributed to the sanctuary's creation, including a special stone for Ghost and his pack. The white wolf's pelt now hung in the sanctuary's great hall, a reminder of how the wild heart of the mountains had saved and transformed her. "Do you think he knows?" Eleanor asked, touching Ghost's memorial stone. "Do you think the spirits see what we've built?" Samuel wrapped his arm around her shoulders. "Every patient healed, every barrier broken, every child who grows up seeing unity instead of division. These are ripples from that moment in the blizzard when you chose dignity over despair. The spirits see, and they approve." A wolf's howl echoed from the distant mountains, joined by others until the night filled with their song. Eleanor smiled, knowing it was just ordinary wolves, yet feeling the connection to something larger. She had been marked by their protection, transformed by their example, and now she carried their teaching forward in human form. The sanctuary would face challenges in the years ahead, Not everyone appreciated its vision of integration and equality. There would be political battles, funding crises, and the eternal struggle against prejudice and fear. But Eleanor faced the future with confidence, knowing she had built something stronger than any individual threat. As they walked back toward their quarters, where their daughter slept under the care of a devoted grandmother figure in Dancing Crow, Eleanor reflected on the journey that had brought her here. An abandoned woman left to die in a blizzard had become a leader, a healer, a bridge between worlds. The transformation hadn't been magical, but earned through trial, choice, and the willingness to see beyond conventional boundaries. "Samuel," she said suddenly, stopping in the moonlit path. "Yes? Thank you for finding me, for believing in me, for standing beside me through everything." He smiled, his face softening in the silver light. "You know what my grandmother used to say? We don't find our path, we create it with each step. You created a path I wanted to walk. Still do." They continued home in comfortable silence, the sanctuary sleeping peacefully around them. In the great hall, Ghost's pelt caught the moonlight, streaming through the windows. And for a moment, Eleanor could almost see the great wolf's form, watching over what had grown from that desperate winter's trial. The future stretched ahead, uncertain but full of possibility. Whatever came, Eleanor knew she would face it as she had learned to face everything, with the wild strength of the wolf, the patience of the mountain, and the healing wisdom passed down through generations of bridge builders and medicine keepers. The sanctuary stood as proof that sometimes the most profound transformations come not from conquering the wild, but from learning to honor it. Not from enforcing divisions, but from finding the courage to cross them. In the end, that was the greatest medicine of all, the healing that comes when we recognize ourselves in the other and find our common humanity in the most unexpected places. As Eleanor entered her home, she paused one last time to look at the mountains where her journey had begun. Somewhere up there, wolves ran free under the stars, living out the ancient contracts between wild and tame, between human and nature. She touched the wolf tooth at her throat and whispered a prayer of gratitude to whatever spirits had orchestrated her transformation from abandoned woman to guardian of this healing place. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new patience, new opportunities to bridge the gaps between worlds. But tonight, surrounded by love and purpose, Eleanor Hartwell slept peacefully, dreaming of wolves and mountains and the endless possibility of human connection. The sanctuary lived and breathed around her, a testament to the power of transformation, the strength found in vulnerability, and the truth that sometimes our greatest trials become our greatest gifts. In saving her, the wolves had saved so much more. They had shown the way toward a future where different peoples might learn to howl together at the same moon, sharing the ancient songs of survival, resilience, and hope. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.